Friday lunchtime in the City of London. Many people had popped out of work to get a sandwich.
Keep moving, please.
Only to be told by police to run.
Why is it? Move away. Keep going. Out of the way, please. Out of the way.
The details of what happened on London Bridge are still emerging. But what we know is that at 1:58, officers were called to Fishmonger Hall, the building you can see in the background here. One man stabbed 5 people. 2 have died from their injuries. This footage seemingly shows members of the public pinning down the assailant. Then, what appears to be the moment the police realise he's wearing a vest. Members of the public back off, and then shots are fired. The police have now confirmed they're treating what happened as a terrorist incident, and that the vest he was wearing was a fake.
I also want to thank the members of the public who have helped, either by showing extraordinary courage and stepping in to tackle this attacker, or indeed by following the instructions they've subsequently been given by officers at the scene and in the area.
London Bridge and the surrounding area is now in lockdown. Those buses behind me aren't in a traffic jam, they were evacuated. Witnesses told us of people running from them. Other witnesses told us how scared and frightened they were and how it reminded them of that terrible attack here 2.5 years ago. Jo Kay had just left her office for lunch.
It was just so surreal. It's like all you could see was police cars racing everywhere. Suddenly you see armed police. You're not used to seeing armed police running towards you and shouting, "Clear the area, clear the area." And immediately you think back to the last terrorist event that happened on London Bridge and you're thinking, oh my God, not again. And then you hear the shots and you hear the loud bang and you look around, there's smoke, there's confusion everywhere. You don't know what's going on and your mind just automatically races to the worst and you just want to get to safety. Yeah.
Another office worker, Harry, witnessed the aftermath from his office window. And what was the reaction in the office?
Yeah, well, it's obviously very upsetting. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's happened quite recently here. So yeah, people are quite upset, I think.
In the last hour, the Press Association has reported the suspect was known to the authorities and had connections to Islamic terrorism. There will inevitably be questions, as there always are after these kinds of attacks, of whether it could have been stopped. Earlier this month, the terror threat level was downgraded from severe to substantial. I asked Richard Walton, former head of the Met's Counter-Terrorism Command, whether he thought that should have happened.
Well, we shouldn't read too much into the lowering of the threat from severe to substantial. There has been a reduced terrorist threat globally across Europe and indeed in the UK from terrorism as 2019 has progressed, and obviously since the military defeat of Islamic State. But the threat level currently stands at substantial, which is still pretty high, and obviously this is has been demonstrated today by this attack.
It's being reported tonight that the government is reviewing that threat level. Political parties have suspended campaigning in London, and this evening a statement from the Prime Minister.
I can assure you and assure everyone that anybody involved in this crime, in these attacks, will be hunted down and will be brought to justice.
The police will now be looking at the motives of the perpetrator and whether he acted alone. London Bridge tonight looks still, peaceful even, but this bridge has seen 2 horrific incidents in the last 3 years, a senseless waste of life in the capital.
James Clayton, well, our correspondent Richard Watson has been covering terrorism cases for almost 20 years and is here. Richard, what do we know tonight?
Well, The Times has an extraordinary story on its front page tomorrow, basically saying that London Bridge attacker was a convicted Islamist terrorist. He was wearing a tag, so he was known to the authorities. And within the last 10 minutes, I've spoken to a very well-placed counter-terrorism source who confirms this is accurate.
Also, what The Times is saying, that he had been released from prison about a year ago, agreeing to wear an electronic tag used obviously to enforce curfews or restrict an offender's movement. The Times story is also saying that this attack first happened in the Fishmonger Hall, where he was attending a criminology conference.
I don't know the detail of this, but my source, who is very well placed, says that it is an accurate story. I mean, this will change everything about the coverage of this.
Absolutely. And tell me, what will the priorities for the police now be, now that the identity of the man appears to be very clear?
Well, the priorities will be quite clear. I mean, essentially now they know the identity of the individual. They'll want to know about his communications, whether he's acting alone, whether he has support. MI5 will no doubt be searching his database of subjects of interest, SOIs. They've got 3,000 current subjects of interest. They've got 20,000, more than 20,000 recent subjects of interest. Clearly, the priority now is to ascertain whether this man has any links with these SOIs.
Thank you very much. Well, now to discuss today's events further, I'm joined by Sir Mark Rowley. Until his retirement last year, he was the Metropolitan Police's Assistant Commissioner and the National Lead on Counter-Terrorism. First of all, Sir Mark, what do you make of this story in the Times, which Richard Watson has corroborated?
Clearly, it's news to me. I'm not on the inside anymore. I think history would show that we would expect police and security services usually to know people are conducting attacks. That's not a surprise. When you've got so many thousands, as Richard describes, where they're constantly being prioritised, sadly sometimes people known to the authorities but further down the list change their actions. But the big priority tonight, tomorrow, the next couple of days for the police and security service will be, was he acting on his own? Or is this a conspiracy? And that's the most urgent thing to be tackled.
Why did the police shoot to kill rather than shoot to maim?
So, shoot to maim gives a sort of spectre of sort of cowboy films and shooting in the leg. That's not realistic. But normally when police confront a threat, somebody with a knife or a gun, as soon as they've shot them, they've fallen to the ground, they'll stop shooting, they'll leap forward and render first aid. If someone's wearing what appears to be a suicide belt, the officers have to assume the person may have a trigger which can be detonated however injured they are, and so the police officers are trained to have the ghastly task to keep firing until the person stops moving. It's an awful task, and one has to admire officers who are prepared to do that.
And according to the Times, he had knives strapped to both arms, and there could have been a gun in his belt. They don't know that, which means that the passers-by who tackled him took the most extraordinary risk.
The public who wrestled him to the ground and seemed to have him pinned down when the police arrived, extraordinary bravery. And we've seen this, haven't we, in previous attacks. I mean, the police advice is always step back and call the police. But if people feel able to step forward and be heroic, then that's fantastic, and it's really to their credit what they've done.
Because
and they may have saved other lives, of course.
I was just going to say, the actions of those people by getting them to the ground, and then we saw what we understand may actually have been a plainclothes police officer and police officer off duty walking away with at least one of the knives. But that whole idea about impulse bravery has been an extraordinary feature of this, of the Manchester Arena bombing, of London Bridge, of Westminster Bridge, of Glasgow Airport. And
the calmness of people on the one hand, but then the bravery of people who rush forward is always extraordinary to see, and is fantastic. And the police always need the support of the public, and it's great to see it in such extraordinary ways.
Now, before we had this Time story, of course, we didn't know who he was, and the question would be, was the ideology of the right, far right, or was it the ideology of radical Islam? However, now we've got a handle on what's going on here. How is that playing just now? Because what we have is we've got the kind of virtual destruction of IS, but yet the caliphate may be gone, but the ideology isn't.
Exactly, and I think we've lost a centre of gravity, perhaps a sort of a headquarters in the caliphate. That doesn't mean IS has gone, and of course all that propaganda, all that material, a lot of it is still out there, and we have radicalised people in our communities, and in parallel with that, of course, we've got the far right and some of the material that's going around the world, which creates things like the Christchurch attack. And those two things play off each other, and the systematic issues that need tackling are in my mind twofold. It's about the way that the internet is propagating material, which is amplifying it, and secondly, the issues in communities where we sometimes have isolated and fragmented communities. That sort of integration and cohesion, together with the medium of the internet, those are the two big themes that come back again and again and again.
And of course, those two big themes are themes that will become, I would imagine, in the final 2 weeks of the election, overwhelming, because the need to de-radicalise, the very idea that he was out on licence with a tag, because presumably he was deemed not to be a threat, and also this idea that it might almost be too late to stop the spread of such information on the internet.
So in terms of the extremism issue, the government appointed Sarah Khan as a counter-extremism commissioner. She published a very good report a couple of months ago, and that's being considered, and I think that offers some starting thinking on what can be done on that issue. In terms of
what has she said, first of all?
She's talked about a whole system, a whole society approach, the fact that there are many social issues, economic issues. There's so much behind these tensions and differences between communities when they're isolated. That it requires many agencies. It's about education, it's about social services. It's not just a policing or a security response. And then I think the online space, it's 5 or 10 years ago, companies like Facebook and Twitter would suggest they had no responsibility pretty much for what was on their platforms. That's slowly moving, but that needs to move further.
But when you look at the last London Bridge attack, and when obviously looking also at the Manchester Arena bombing in this, is there an idea now that actually where you can create a lot of noise particularly and create a lot of political tension is attacking during an election?
Is it a coincidence or is it planned that it's within the election? I don't know the answer to that. Of course it's possible.
The other thing, of course, is that you have a situation where the threat level is reduced. Whether that made a material difference, what do you think?
I don't think it would have made a material difference. And if one looks at the exact words, it's a very fine gradation.
But what we know now, as you say, there's not the big organised attack before. This is a lone actor, we think. It may not be, but a lone actor is much tougher to detect for MI5.
And it's the volatility of these characters. Somebody who can be calm 1 minute and then something goes wrong in their personal life, something changes for them, and they hook their anger onto a long-term support of extremism and then act. And that's very, very difficult to spot because the flash to bang is so short.
But in that flash to bang being so short, have we become, after 2.5 years, too complacent?
I don't think we're too complacent. The messages about vigilance and things are out there the whole time, and that's why the security forces need everyone's help. In the days of tight, isolated groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda cells or the IRA, surveillance was very powerful. When you've got these dispersed groups of volatile individuals, it needs everyone's pairs of eyes to spot somebody who's changing dramatically.
Richard, Sir Mark, thank you very much indeed.